A single line of ink on a 1,000-year-old parchment marks a city now under the waves. These ancient maps are not just directions, they are our planet's forgotten diaries. By the end of this exploration, you will see history not as a fixed point, but as a living record of a world in constant flux. We are about to decode how medieval mapmakers, using faith and folklore as their guides, accidentally charted climate shifts and lost empires. What secrets hide in the dragons drawn at the edge of the world, and what vanished shores do their precise lines reveal? What story does the map you trust today tell about the world you will leave behind? The monk's quill scratches across the treated animal skin, a fragile surface that must last for centuries. His world is not measured by satellites or compasses, but by scripture, stars, and the rare, whispered account of a returning pilgrim. In this candlelit room, geography is an act of devotion. To draw a map is to illustrate the very order of creation, a belief perfectly captured by historian David Woodward, who called these works arguments about the nature of reality. Every line served a higher purpose. A strange creature drawn in a distant ocean was not mere decoration. It was a placeholder for the mysteries of God's design, a way to say, here be truths we cannot yet measure. Biblical events were etched directly onto the landscape, with the Garden of Eden often placed in the distant east, not as a fictional locale but as a real, if unreachable, part of the physical world. Consider the vast Ebstorf Map, where the body of Christ literally encircles the known lands, a powerful image declaring that the environment itself, its mountains, rivers, and seas, exists within a divine and stable framework. This is the cartographer's mindset. Unusual weather, a slowly encroaching coastline, or a river changing its course were not separate scientific events. They were notes in a larger spiritual narrative. When we look at these maps today, we are not just looking at old geography. We are deciphering a lost language of observation, one that recorded planetary changes as integral chapters in a story of faith. This challenges us to ask a profound question. Our modern maps are masterpieces of technical precision, showing real-time traffic and satellite imagery. But what story do they tell? They show us where things are, but rarely why they matter. The medieval mapmaker wove environment and belief into a single tapestry. To find the hidden data in their work, we must first learn to read that tapestry, starting with the very skin it was drawn upon. That durable vellum surface is more than just a canvas, it is a time capsule of its own. To understand what these maps reveal, we must first understand what they are made of, because the parchment, the pigments, and even the wear marks are silent witnesses to the world that created them. Every stage of a map's physical creation left a fingerprint of its environment. The animal whose skin became the vellum grazed on specific plants in a specific climate. Microscopic analysis today can sometimes find ancient pollen grains or even spores trapped within the very fibers, offering a snapshot of the local ecosystem centuries ago. The inks tell their own stories. Rich blues might come from crushed lapis lazuli, a stone traded across vast distances from a single region in modern-day Afghanistan. A simple black line could be iron gall ink, made from oak galls and iron salts, and its precise chemical signature can hint at trade networks or local manufacturing practices. This turns the map into a layered artifact. On the surface, it shows geography, but within its physical body, it holds data on botany, commerce, and chemistry. Modern technology allows us to read this hidden text. Conservation scientists use tools like multispectral imaging, which views the parchment under different wavelengths of light. This can reveal faded annotations, sketches that were later scrubbed away, or even the ghostly outline of a previous map reused for the parchment. Sometimes, these hidden layers contain the most valuable clues, a scribbled note in the margin about an unusually harsh winter that froze a river, or a record of a coastline that no longer matches the drawing. The famous and controversial Vinland map, for instance, sparked intense debate not just about its drawn coastlines, but about the very chemistry of its ink, with studies aiming to determine if its materials align with a medieval understanding of the North Atlantic world. Each physical clue, from a pigment's origin to a parchment's thickness, builds a more complete picture of the map's journey through time. This leads us to a powerful reflection. Our maps today are digital, glowing on screens, seemingly weightless and impermanent. We update them with a tap, but what physical trace of our current planetary moment will remain for a future historian? There will be no vellum to analyze, no hand-mixed ink to chemically date. Our legacy might be a different kind of data layer, one of server farms and altered carbon signatures. The medieval map's incredible durability forces us to confront the fleeting nature of our own records. Yet, the purpose remains the same, to make sense of our place in a changing world. Having seen how the map's body holds secrets, we can now look more clearly at the mind that drew upon it, and the surprising accuracy hidden within its seemingly fanciful symbols. Within that protective circle of vellum, medieval mapmakers drew a more profound circle, a band of blue paint that defined their entire world. On diagrams like the classic TO map, a single, continuous ocean called the Oceanus rings every continent. This was not just a pretty border, it was a powerful statement of belief, depicting Earth as an island of order adrift in a boundless and often perilous sea. The encircling ocean represented a fundamental truth of their time, the concept of a finite world with clear, natural boundaries. Think of it as an early, intuitive understanding of environmental limits. Everything humanity knew, every city, forest, and kingdom, existed inside that protective ring. Beyond it lay only mystery and potential chaos. This is why the outer margins of these maps, the space within that blue band, are so often filled with elaborate sea monsters and fantastical ships. These creatures were more than decoration. They were symbolic placeholders for the very real dangers of the unknown, for storms, shipwrecks, and the terrifying vastness of uncharted waters. They gave a face to the natural forces that could isolate entire civilizations or, for the brave sailor, connect them. The famous Psalter world map from the 13th century presents this idea with stunning clarity. The ocean is a precise, unbroken barrier, a literal moat around the garden of the known world. Over centuries, as knowledge from travelers and traders slowly filtered back to European scriptoriums, the depiction of this ocean began to change. Tentative peninsulas might stretch toward its center, or the shapes of distant lands like Asia would bulge against its inner edge, hinting at a world that was far more connected than the simple circle first suggested. The symbol evolved from a wall of pure mystery into a complex highway of both peril and possibility. This ancient vision of a bounded planet invites a challenging reflection. Our modern maps show a seamless, interconnected blue expanse, with shipping lanes and flight paths crisscrossing it like digital threads. We perceive no encircling monster-filled void, only a continuous global system. But has this made us more or less aware of the ocean's true fragility? The medieval mind saw the sea as a powerful, defining limit. We often see it as an infinite resource or a convenient pathway, its depths still holding mysteries we are only beginning to comprehend. Their symbol of a vulnerable island world, surrounded by a powerful and mysterious force, might be a more prescient warning than we once thought. It frames our entire existence within a delicate, aqueous border. And within that border, on the lands they could actually walk, medieval cartographers embedded an even more surprising kind of truth, one written not in monsters, but in meticulous, practical detail. At the very top of the medieval world, just east of center, a tiny, walled garden was drawn. From this singular point, labeled Paradise, 4 great rivers burst forth to water the entire earth. This was not a random artistic choice. It was the era's foundational theory of hydrology, a map of the planet's very lifeblood. The Tigris, Euphrates, Pishon, and Gihon were understood to be the divine source springs from which all other rivers, from the Nile to the Danube, ultimately drew their flow. On monumental works like the Hereford Mappa Mundi, these 4 rivers are depicted as thick, vital arteries branching across the continents, a powerful visual argument that all water, and thus all life, originated from a single sacred point. The cartographers were doing more than illustrating scripture. They were attempting to impose a logical, unified system onto the chaotic reality of global geography. They often carefully aligned these symbolic rivers with the courses of real ones they knew, creating a fascinating blend of myth and observation. The Nile, for instance, was frequently shown as a direct branch of the Gihon, its mysterious southern source explained by this celestial connection. This symbol reveals a profound medieval worldview. Water was not a local resource but a shared gift from a central, spiritual wellspring, connecting every kingdom and forest in a single hydrological family. Historians note that subtle changes in how these rivers were drawn over time can be telling. In some later maps, a river might appear thinner, or its course might shift slightly. While not scientific records, these alterations could reflect growing anxieties heard in travelers' tales, of droughts affecting trade routes or marshlands slowly receding. The 4 rivers were a stable, hopeful symbol of abundance, so any visual deviation from that ideal might whisper of environmental change perceived as a spiritual or physical disruption. This ancient cartographic model holds up a mirror to our own maps. Today, we chart watersheds and aquifers with laser precision, but we rarely symbolize the source of life itself. Our maps show political borders cutting across rivers, not sacred origins uniting them. The medieval mapmaker saw a planet interconnected by water from a single, revered origin. We see a planet of separate nations managing scarce resources. Their symbol challenges a modern assumption that water is a regional commodity, not a global inheritance. It frames every stream and every sea as part of one great, branching system that begins conceptually in a single garden. This focus on life-giving water naturally draws our eye to where it meets the land, to the coastlines that were not just borders on a page, but the ever-changing frontiers of the known world. The sailor's hand traces a web of lines radiating from a central circle, not to find paradise but to find port. This is a Portolan chart, and its world is not defined by faith, but by the urgent, practical need to survive the next voyage. Drawn on sheepskin for durability against salt spray, these maps are masterpieces of lived experience. Their core is a spiderweb of room lines, direct routes a ship could sail by holding a single compass bearing. Every coastline is rendered with a frantic, obsessive detail. Every bay, every headland, every safe harbor is named and measured by the lived memory of generations of mariners. This precision makes them something far more valuable than navigation aids. They are unintentional snapshots, the most accurate coastal surveys that existed for centuries, and they capture a moment in the long, slow dance between land and sea. Where a TO map showed a symbolic ocean, the Portolan chart records the actual, unstable edge of the world. Its astonishing accuracy in some places, and its curious omissions or distortions in others, become a code we can now crack. A coastline drawn with a deep, protective bay where today there is only a straight beach whispers of centuries of sediment deposited by a river. A cluster of small, carefully drawn islands in a lagoon that modern satellites show as a single, large landmass speaks of relentless erosion or deliberate land reclamation. Marine archaeologists now use these charts as starting points for discovery. By comparing the detailed renderings of places like the Venetian lagoon on a 14th century chart with sonar and satellite data, researchers can identify where channels have silted up, where islands have vanished beneath the waves, and even pinpoint likely locations for submerged fishing villages or lost port structures. The famous Carta Pisana, the oldest surviving Portolan, depicts the Mediterranean with a coastline that is, in many places, hauntingly recognizable. Yet in others, the shape of the land has shifted dramatically, a testament to natural forces like rising seas or catastrophic storms that reshaped the shore. This invites a quiet, almost haunting reflection. If a medieval sailor from the age of the Carta Pisana were to approach one of our modern coastal megacities, would they recognize the shoreline? The basic silhouette of a mountain range might endure, but the bustling waterfront built on landfill, the straightened rivers, the massive seawalls holding back the ocean, all of this would be utterly alien. Their map recorded a coast they negotiated with as a powerful, mutable partner. Our maps often show a coast we have tried to fix in place to control. The Portolan charts remind us that the shore was never a permanent line, but a conversation, and the precise details those sailors so carefully recorded are notes from that conversation, telling us how much the very ground beneath our largest cities has already changed. And as those sailors looked inland from their precious, detailed coasts, they often marked the blank spaces with a different kind of mystery. The phrase "here be dragons" is perhaps the most evocative legend a map can bear, but it is almost never actually written there. The real dragons are far more vivid, coiled in the margins of uncharted seas. On the Carta Marina, drawn by Olaus Magnus in the 1530s, the waters around Scandinavia teem with life, but not all of it is friendly. A colossal lobster seizes a sailor in its claw. A sea serpent with the bristled back of a dragon encircles a ship. A massive, tusked whale sprays water from its blowhole. These were not flights of pure fancy. They were a sophisticated symbolic language for the sailor. Each creature corresponded to a real-world condition. The serpent might mark a zone of unpredictable, crushing currents. The giant fish could indicate an area known for sudden, dense schools that could swamp a small vessel, or conversely, a region where fish were mysteriously absent, a warning of poor hunting. The whale's location often aligned with known migration routes, a potential hazard but also a sign of life in a desolate stretch of ocean. These monsters were the medieval equivalent of a modern hazard symbol, a way to encode practical knowledge about the planet's most volatile and least understood regions. They represented the acknowledgement of powerful natural forces that operated outside human control or full comprehension. The mapmaker was saying, in effect, here the rules are different, here the environment itself is unpredictable. This ancient practice of picturing the unknown holds a profound lesson for our time. We have mapped every inch of the globe with satellites, leaving no literal dragons behind. But our modern climate models are now drawing their own monsters, not with ink but with data. We see them as zones of tipping points like the thawing permafrost, or as feedback loops of intensifying storms and rising heat. These are our dragons, the symbolic placeholders for planetary systems whose full behavior remains complex and daunting. The medieval cartographer had the humility to illustrate the limit of their knowledge as a beast in the water. Our challenge is to maintain that same humility when confronting the chaotic systems we have charted but cannot fully tame. And if the dragons mark the dangerous wilds, then the careful clusters of spires and walls drawn on the map mark the very opposite, the human attempt to create order and permanence in the face of that wildness. A tiny sketched church, labeled with a name now spoken only by historians, marks a city that has vanished from the earth. On maps like the sprawling Tabula Peutingeriana, a Roman itinerary chart copied by medieval monks, the world is a network of roads connecting symbols, each little building icon representing a hub of human life. The mapmaker's choice of what to include, what to emphasize, and what to omit was never neutral. It was a direct reflection of a city's perceived importance, which was inextricably tied to its environmental fortune. A prominent, detailed settlement drawn at a river's mouth spoke of thriving trade and reliable fresh water. That same symbol, faded or missing on a map made a century later, is a silent alarm bell. Its absence could whisper of a river that changed course, cutting off trade, or of a harbor that silted up, stranding the economy. It might hint at prolonged drought that emptied the granaries, or at the societal strain that followed widespread illness. These maps become a ledger of urban vitality, where the ink itself seems to respond to ecological pressure. Take the story of Dunwich on the English coast. On medieval charts, it was a major port, a cluster of spires and wharves worthy of careful notation. Yet over centuries, a relentless combination of fierce storms and rising seas devoured the city, street by street, building by building. Today, it is a quiet village with its lost cathedral and markets lying under the North Sea. The maps that once proudly featured it now serve as a haunting baseline, allowing archaeologists to match historical cartography with sonar images of the drowned streets below the waves. Urban historians cross-reference these cartographic clues with soil samples, foundation stones, and records of tax revenue, building a story not just of political decline, but of environmental change as a primary actor. This prompts a difficult but necessary reflection. Our modern maps are dense with megacities, glowing hubs of immense population and power. We assume their permanence. But which of these giants might a cartographer 500 years from now depict as a faded symbol, or not at all? The question is not about prophecy, but about vulnerability. A city's fate is often sealed not by invasion, but by the slow creep of a desert, the intrusion of salt water into its aquifers, or the unbearable heat that drives its people away. The medieval map reminds us that cities are not permanent features of the landscape. They are conditional agreements with it, and those agreements can be broken by a changing climate. And the survival of any city, ancient or modern, has always depended on the fertile lands that stretched beyond its walls. Between the city walls and the encircling ocean lies the green expanse, the land that fed empires. On the Ebstorf map, the known world is dotted with tiny, meticulous forests, each one a cluster of stylized trees no bigger than a fingernail. These are not decorations, they are data points. In an age before land surveys, these symbols formed a rudimentary but vital record of the planet's living skin. A dense cluster of trees drawn near a castle might mark a protected royal forest, a source of timber for ships and game for the nobility. A patterned grid of lines beside a river could indicate cultivated fields, the breadbasket of a region. The mapmaker, in choosing where to place these symbols and where to leave the parchment bare, was creating a snapshot of medieval agroecology. The famous Go map of Britain from the 14th century makes this practice stunningly clear. It uses a simple, repeated symbol of a tree to denote woods, and even marks out specific vineyards in the south. By comparing these cartographic records with pollen samples from lakebed sediments, scientists can see a conversation between art and ecology. A region shown as densely wooded on the map often aligns with sediment layers rich in oak and beech pollen. Conversely, an area depicted as open field on an early map, in a place we know was once ancient forest, tells a story of land clearance, of trees felled for pasture or to build growing towns. This green ink becomes a proxy for human pressure on the landscape. The inclusion or praise of certain regions as fertile breadbaskets on maps often coincides with historical periods of plenty, while the silence around others or notes of poor soil can whisper of the hardships of famine that followed crop failure. These maps did not predict weather, but they recorded its consequences on the human scale, in the presence or absence of the green symbols that meant survival. This leads us to a quiet, powerful comparison. We now have satellite maps that show global vegetation in real time, vibrant swirls of chlorophyll green measured from space. They are infinitely more precise, tracking the health of the Amazon or the spread of farmland with scientific detachment. But what story will these maps tell a future historian? They will show with brutal clarity the fingerprint of our age, the Anthropocene. They will reveal not just where the forests were, but the precise decade they shrank, the geometric patterns of industrial agriculture replacing chaotic wilderness. Our green is measured in wavelengths of light, not in symbolic trees, yet the fundamental truth remains the same. The way we draw the green on our maps, whether with ink or with pixels, is a testament to how we value the living land and a record of the price we have asked it to pay. This delicate balance between what the land provided and what people demanded was ultimately governed by a force far larger than any king or cartographer: the long, slow rhythms of the climate itself. Around the edges of the Henry of Mainz world map, a circle of faces exhales onto the land. With puffed cheeks and flowing breath, these wind heads are not just artistic whimsy, they are a profound medieval attempt to give identity and order to the invisible forces that shaped their world. Each face had a name and a character. Zephyrus, the west wind, brought gentle spring rains and was often depicted as a youthful, serene figure. In stark contrast, Eurus, the stormy east wind from the direction of the deserts, might be shown as a scowling, bearded elder, his breath whipping up waves and sandstorms. This system, inherited from ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, was a sophisticated catalogue of climate. It personified the predictable patterns of the atmosphere, turning abstract weather into a cast of characters with predictable roles in the seasonal drama of planting, harvesting, and sailing. The placement of these faces was deliberate, corresponding to the 8 principal wind directions of the classical wind rose. A sailor consulting a Portolan chart would see the same directional logic rendered in practical lines, the room lines for navigation aligning perfectly with the breath of these personified winds. This visual language reveals an observational, almost intimate understanding of environmental consistency. The mapmaker was noting that certain winds always brought certain weather, that the monsoon cycles of the Indian Ocean followed a reliable rhythm, and that the success of the entire harvest could depend on recognizing the face of the approaching wind. It was a proto-scientific method, recording not just geography but the behavior of the sky above it. The wind faces represent a world where climate was not a distant concept but a daily, personified interaction. This invites a quiet reflection on our own visual language for the atmosphere. We have depersonalized the wind, replacing bearded faces with isobars on a weather map and tracking jet streams with satellite animations. Our understanding is vastly more accurate but perhaps less visceral. In an age of changing global patterns, where do we find the characters in our climate story? Our modern personifications might be the named hurricanes barreling toward coasts, or the colored zones on a heat map spreading across continents. The medieval mind sought to understand the climate by giving it a face and a name, a way to relate to its power. We now track forces of far greater scale and complexity, but the essential human need remains to comprehend the immense, invisible systems that govern our survival. And if the wind faces map the breadth of the world, then the carefully inked spheres and constellations above them charted its guiding soul, the stable heavens against which all earthly change was measured. A human figure stands at the center of the cosmos, his body a living map of the stars. This is the Zodiac man, a diagram found in the margins of medical manuscripts and sometimes woven into the very fabric of world maps. From the head of Aries down to the feet of Pisces, each astrological sign governed a specific part of the anatomy, linking the celestial dance directly to human health, the seasons, and the rhythms of agriculture. This was not mere superstition, it was a complete cosmological model, a belief that the heavens exerted a direct physical influence on everything below. When this idea was applied to geography, as on maps like the famous Leo Belgicus where the constellation Leo was superimposed over a map of the Netherlands, it created a powerful symbol. The position of the stars was thought to dictate the climate of a region, the flow of its tides, and the success of its harvests. In this worldview, a drought was not a random event. It was a sign of celestial imbalance, a disruption in the harmony between the macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of the Earth. An expert in the history of science would note this represents one of humanity's earliest attempts to model what we now call external forcing, the idea that forces from outside our planetary system can drive change within it. They saw the hand of the Zodiac. We now measure the pulse of the sun and the slow wobble of Earth's orbit. While their specific mechanism was not scientifically accurate, their core intuition was profound. They recognized that earthly life was subject to rhythms far grander and more distant than any local weather pattern. This invites a fascinating reflection. Our modern science has refined this ancient connection into precise celestial mechanics. We understand the Milankovitch cycles, the subtle changes in Earth's orbit and tilt that trigger ice ages over tens of thousands of years. We track solar activity and its impact on our magnetosphere and climate. We have not abandoned the medieval idea of cosmic influence. We have simply given it mathematics and data. The Zodiac man symbolically connected the human body to the stars, and in a way, our climate models now connect the entire planetary body to the rhythms of our solar system. This cosmic perspective, however grand, always had a profoundly practical purpose: to help people plant, heal, and navigate. It was a theory meant to be used, and this need for practical measurement would drive the next great leap in how we saw our world, moving from symbolic cycles to quantified space. The vast expanse of Asia is often shrunk to a sliver, while the holy city of Jerusalem swells to dominate the center of the world. These dramatic distortions of scale on medieval maps are not simply mistakes. They are a profound form of data compression, revealing what the mapmaker knew, what they valued, and crucially, what environmental intelligence they lacked. When a region is drawn large and in meticulous detail, it signifies a place frequently traveled, its coastlines measured by countless voyages, its rivers well documented, its seasonal weather patterns familiar to traders. Conversely, a continent condensed into a vague shape, like the often undersized Africa on many Mappa Mundi, represents a land of rumor and scarce report. The map's scale becomes a direct reflection of human traffic and, by extension, of environmental knowledge. A large, detailed Europe next to a shrunken, vague Asia does not mean Asia was unimportant. It signals that first-hand, consistent accounts of its monsoon cycles, its mountain passes, or its interior deserts were rare and unreliable. The mapmaker, lacking data, resorted to symbolism or left spaces blank. This principle is laid bare in masterworks like the Catalan Atlas of the 1370s. The Mediterranean basin is rendered with astonishing accuracy, its distances between ports carefully calibrated from generations of sailor logs, but trace a route south across the Sahara and the scale collapses. The Great Desert is compressed, its oases perhaps misplaced, the kingdoms beyond it like Mali drawn from magnificent but second-hand descriptions. This cartographic shorthand might reflect more than just geographic ignorance. It could encode the very real environmental barrier the desert presented. A period of increased aridity or shifting dune fields could make traditional caravan routes impassable for decades, severing the flow of information and leading the mapmaker to simply shrink the entire challenging region. The distortion is a silent witness to a changing climate's impact on human connection. This forces a challenging question about our own cartography. Our modern climate projection maps are masterpieces of scale and data, showing temperature gradients and sea level rise with scientific precision. But where are the distortions on those maps? They exist not in the coastlines, but in the data layers themselves. Some regions, like North America and Europe, are covered by dense networks of weather stations and satellites, yielding high-resolution forecasts. Other parts of the world, particularly over oceans or in less economically developed areas, remain blurrier, their future climate models relying on sparser data. The scale of our certainty is uneven. What we choose to measure in detail and what we must estimate reveals our priorities and our blind spots just as clearly as the enlarged Jerusalem on a parchment map. These historical scale errors prepare us to confront the most honest admission a map can make, the blank space that says, "Here we simply do not know." The blank space on the map holds a different kind of truth. Beyond the intricate coastlines and the detailed city icons, the parchment often gives way to emptiness, a region labeled simply terra incognita, unknown land. These voids are not failures of cartography, they are deliberate admissions, frontiers of both geographic and environmental knowledge. The vast, open interior of Africa on a typical Mappa Mundi was not merely a sign of ignorance, but a powerful statement, an acknowledgement of a climate and geography so profoundly different from European experience that it defied the existing language of maps. The cartographer, lacking first-hand accounts of the Sahel's seasonal shifts or the Congo's rainforests, left the space blank rather than fill it with guesswork. This practice becomes a historical barometer. Compare the Roman tabula Peutingeriana, which depicts the Sahara with a chain of settlements and lakes, to later medieval maps where the same region is often a barren, featureless expanse. This shift may reflect more than lost knowledge. It could be a cartographic echo of the desert's southward expansion, a slow environmental change that made ancient trade routes and oases vanish, literally erasing places from the collective geographic memory. The empty northern reaches on many charts tell a similar story of climate's grip. As the Little Ice Age intensified from the 14th century onward, bringing harsher winters and advancing glaciers, the Arctic became more inaccessible and forbidding. Mapmakers responded by leaving those margins blank or filling them with icy motifs, a silent testament to a climate that had turned actively hostile to exploration. These omissions are a language all their own, speaking volumes about what societies could not see, could not reach, or could no longer survive. This leads us to a vital question for our own time. We have mapped every continent's surface, but what are our modern terrae incogniti? They are not blank spaces on a globe, but gaps in our understanding of deep planetary systems. We have detailed charts of the ocean's surface, yet its abyssal plains and the complex life there remain a profound mystery, a frontier that regulates our climate in ways we are still learning. Our maps of the Arctic show the land clearly, but the subterranean world of thawing permafrost and its potential to release vast stores of carbon is a looming, poorly charted feedback loop. These are the silent, data-poor regions on our scientific maps, the places where our models must estimate, where the dragons of unintended consequence may yet dwell. The medieval cartographer met the limit of knowledge with a respectful, empty parchment. Our challenge is to stare into our own data voids with that same humility, to recognize that the loudest warnings about our changing planet may come not from what we have mapped in bright detail, but from the quiet, still blank spaces we have yet to fully understand. Rising from the plains of Mesopotamia, a spiraling tower reaches for the heavens, its top lost in a swirl of clouds. On maps like the Hereford Mappa Mundi, the Tower of Babel is not merely a biblical landmark, it is a profound environmental cautionary tale etched directly onto the landscape. Its story of a united humanity attempting to build a structure to the sky, only to be scattered and confounded, was understood by medieval viewers as a direct parable about the dangers of hubris, of challenging the natural and divine order. The mapmaker's choice to place this symbol in a specific region, often with great care, connected geography to a powerful narrative about limits. In a world where large-scale building projects, like clearing vast forests for cathedral construction or diverting rivers for mill ponds, were visibly altering the local environment, the tower served as a permanent, inked reminder. It warned that human ambition, when disconnected from a sense of balance, could lead to fragmentation and disharmony, not just among people, but with the very world they inhabited. This symbol prompts a challenging reflection for our time. We no longer build towers of brick, but we undertake projects of planetary scale. When we discuss large-scale geoengineering proposals, like injecting particles into the stratosphere to cool the planet or fertilizing oceans to absorb carbon, are we hearing a faint echo of Babel's ambition? These are modern towers, attempts to reshape fundamental atmospheric systems through sheer technical will. The medieval mapmaker used the tower to illustrate a spiritual and ecological principle that overreach invites disruption. Our challenge is to discern where necessary innovation ends and dangerous overreach begins, to ask if in solving one crisis we might inadvertently create a cascade of unforeseen others, a new kind of fragmentation. This ancient symbol, drawn on a fragile skin of vellum, confronts us with a timeless question about the scale of our interventions in a delicate system. And it was precisely this drive to reach beyond known limits, to test the edges of the map, that would soon transform the parchment itself, launching an age where ambition would sail directly into the blank spaces. A spiral of shells and fibers rests not on parchment, but in the mind of a navigator. While European monks charted a world ordered by faith across the oceans, entirely different cartographic traditions were mapping the planet through intimate, sustained partnership with its living systems. To understand the full story of our changing world, we must step outside the scriptorium and into the canoe to see how cultures without a written alphabet or even a concept of linear perspective encoded profound ecological wisdom into their maps. Consider the Polynesian stick charts known as Rebelib, crafted from supple palm ribs and cowrie shells. These were not pictures of land to be hung on a wall, but three-dimensional memory aids. The curved sticks represented the dominant swell patterns of the open ocean, patterns created by distant storms and steady trade winds. The shells marked specific atolls or islands. To read this map was to feel the ocean's pulse, to interpret how these great swells would bend and refract around an unseen island, creating a unique interference pattern in the water that a skilled navigator could detect miles before land was sighted. This was a dynamic, kinetic cartography that mapped not static land, but the fluid behavior of the sea itself, a real-time environmental data stream written in waves. Similarly, in Mesoamerica, the Maya Dresden Codex presents a breathtakingly precise almanac. Its pages are a complex grid of dates and deities, but modern scholars recognize it as a sophisticated agricultural calendar. It meticulously correlates the cycles of Venus with anticipated rainfall patterns, allowing communities to plan their planting and harvesting in sync with celestial and climatic rhythms. This was a map of time and weather, a predictive model built from centuries of observation. Ethnocartographers, scholars who study these indigenous mapping systems, emphasize their holistic nature. Space was not an abstract grid to be measured and conquered, but a lived network of relationships between people, ancestors, animals, plants, and celestial bodies. A map might show a mountain not just as a shape, but as a source of a specific spring, home to a particular spirit, and the origin place of a clan. This embedded deep ecological knowledge directly into cultural memory, framing sustainability not as a policy, but as a sacred obligation to maintain balance within a connected web. Including this vast and often overlooked corpus of world maps does more than fill a historical gap. It reveals a parallel human narrative of observing and adapting to planetary change. These traditions did not see the environment as a separate stage for human drama, but as the central, intelligent character in the story. This presents a powerful challenge to our modern, data-saturated moment. We possess global climate models of unimaginable complexity, yet we often feel disconnected from the systems they describe. What could we learn by integrating these other ways of knowing? Could the Polynesian understanding of wave patterns inform how we model ocean current shifts? Could the Maya's integration of celestial and agricultural cycles inspire more holistic approaches to seasonal forecasting? This expanded view does not diminish the European maps, but it reframes them. They become one thread in a much richer tapestry of human attempts to comprehend a dynamic home. And it is against this backdrop of diverse global knowledge that we now witness the collision that would weave many of these threads and tear others apart, creating a single, fateful image that claimed to show the whole world for the very first time. A dusty manuscript arrives in Florence carrying a forgotten language. It is Ptolemy's Geographia, a 2nd century text lost to Western Europe for 1,000 years. Within its pages, scholars do not find dragons or wind faces, but something far more revolutionary, a grid. Ptolemy laid out a system of coordinates, lines of latitude and longitude, and gave precise instructions for projecting the curved surface of the Earth onto a flat sheet of parchment. For the Florentine humanists of the 15th century, this was a conceptual earthquake. The world was no longer just a story to be illustrated. It was a measurable space to be calculated. This reintroduced a powerful idea that the planet could be scaled and therefore that any feature upon it could be compared, remeasured, and seen to change over time. The grid provided a consistent skeleton, a neutral framework upon which new observations could be hung and directly contrasted with old ones. You can see this intellectual struggle beautifully captured in the Ulm edition of Ptolemy's maps, printed in 1482. The maps faithfully reproduce the ancient coastlines and cities as Ptolemy described them, but the printers could not resist. In the margins, and sometimes right over the classical outlines, they added notes from contemporary sailors, sketches of newly discovered islands, and corrections to the shape of Africa. The page itself becomes a battlefield between ancient authority and new evidence. This was the birth of a new cartographic conscience, one that understood the map not as a perfect, symbolic portrait, but as a working document, always subject to revision based on new data from a changing world. The Ptolemaic grid did not create accuracy overnight, but it created the possibility of accuracy, a shared mathematical language for noting error. This innovation leads us directly to our own screens. Our modern digital maps are built on a global grid of unimaginable precision, the foundation of every geographic information system. We use this grid not just to place a city, but to measure the annual retreat of a glacier to the centimeter, to track the northward creep of a forest biome over decades, to calculate the exact loss of Arctic sea ice each summer. Ptolemy gave us the graph paper. We now plot the planet's vital signs upon it in real time. His revival taught us that to care for a changing world, you must first have a consistent way to measure it. The arrival of a single printed sheet in the year 1507 sent a tremor through the learned world. It was the Wald-Seemüller map, and it dared to label a vast, strange landmass in the Western Ocean with a new name, America. This was not a gentle revision, it was a cartographic earthquake. In an instant, the symbolic circle of the known world, that comforting ring of ocean from the TO maps, was shattered. Here was a continent of staggering scale, utterly absent from Ptolemy's ancient grid and from every biblical genealogy. The mapmakers themselves seemed stunned by the data flooding in from explorers. They drew the coast of South America with a frantic, jagged line, a rushed sketch trying to contain a geographic reality too big for their parchment. North America, by contrast, was often a vague, ghostly presence, sometimes disconnected, sometimes merged with Asia in a confused tangle. these were not confident surveys, they were frantic notes from the edge of a paradigm breaking apart. The shock was not just geographic, it was profoundly environmental. The old models had no category for the Amazon's endless rainforest, a humid, teeming world that defied European ideas of temperate agriculture. They had no precedent for the Andes, mountains so high they seemed to scrape the vault of heaven. The maps, in their rushed inaccuracies, reveal a struggle to assimilate not just new lands, but entirely new climatic zones and ecosystems into an old mental framework. Historians often speak of the Columbian exchange that followed, the monumental and often difficult transfer of plants, animals, and people between the hemispheres. But the first hint of that coming biological revolution is right there on these maps. The very act of drawing a new coastline was an admission that the world's catalogue of life, its environmental library, was suddenly and dramatically incomplete. This moment forces a sharp, modern reflection. We pride ourselves on a fully mapped planet, but are we living through a similar kind of cartographic shock today? Our maps are not expanding outward but transforming from within. We are scrambling to chart the newly navigable Arctic passages opened by retreating sea ice, drawing shipping lanes where once there was only solid white. We are mapping the catastrophic bleaching of coral reefs, using satellite data to paint in sad hues of gray where vibrant ecosystems once thrived. These are not discoveries of new lands, but discoveries of profound change in lands we thought we knew. The frantic, updating lines on our climate models mirror the rushed coasts of the Waldseemüller map, both representing a desperate attempt to capture a planetary reality that is evolving faster than our old models can comfortably hold. That medieval scramble to comprehend a suddenly larger world finds its ultimate expression in the drive to map the most remote, most challenging frontiers of all, the poles. At the very top of Mercator's world map, a massive black spire pierces the page, labeled Rupp's Nigra, the Black Rock. This was his calculated solution to a navigator's greatest mystery, the wandering compass. He envisioned a colossal magnetic mountain at the North Pole, pulling all needles toward its summit, a symbolic anchor for a chaotic natural force. For centuries, the poles were not places at all, but conceptual limits, drawn as jagged rings of ice or walls guarded by frost giants. They were the ultimate terra incognita, the final blank space framed not as emptiness but as an impassable, frozen barrier. This cartography of myth began to fracture with the ink of explorers. When the Dutch mariner Gerrit de Veer mapped the desperate wintering of Willem Barents's expedition in 1596, he was not drawing symbols. His sketches show the specific, craggy outline of Nova Zembla's coast, the precise shape of icebergs they used for shelter, and the relentless grip of the pack ice that doomed their ship. These were not mythical barriers, they were measured observations, the first true baselines of the Arctic's historical extent. Each expedition that followed added another layer of precise, desperate data, charting shorelines and ice edges with the frantic accuracy of men trying to escape them. We now hold these maps in one hand and satellite imagery in the other, and the comparison is breathtaking. The coastlines de Veer drew, often while suffering through months of perpetual night, are now recognizable. But the vast, solid white plains of sea ice he depicted stretching to the horizon are gone. The mythical barrier has melted into a seasonal passage, a measurable frontier retreating year by year. Those centuries of increasingly precise maps have become a haunting time lapse, revealing not just a loss of ice, but a staggering acceleration in the rate of that loss. The early charts show a world that seemed permanently locked in frost. The later ones show a slow, steady retreat. Our modern data reveals a cliff, a precipitous drop in ice volume and extent that compresses into decades what the older maps suggested would take millennia. This transforms every historical sketch from a tale of survival into a critical data point. the polar map has evolved from a warning of a dangerous edge to a diagnostic chart of a feverish planet. This urgent, quantified view of our world's vital signs was only made possible by a final, profound shift in perspective, one that lifted the cartographer's eye from the parchment and placed it high above the clouds. The cartographer's workshop is no longer a silent scriptorium, but a cluttered cabinet of curiosities. Brass gleams beside the parchment, a new generation of instruments lying ready to measure what faith alone could not. The astrolabe, a handheld model of the heavens, the cross-staff for gauging the sun's angle, the compass needle now swinging freely in a sealed bowl. These were not just tools for navigation, they were lenses for a new kind of vision. Their true revolution was not merely in plotting a straighter course, but in creating a new language of precision, one capable of recording the planet's whispers, not just its shouts. A sailor with a cross-staff could return to the same estuary year after year and note, with a new and troubling certainty, that the sandbar had shifted a few hundred paces seaward. A harbour master with a lead line could chart the silting of a vital channel, recording depths that grew shallower with each passing season. These instruments turned anecdote into data, transforming a vague observation about a changing coast into a measurable, repeatable fact. The map became a ledger of incremental loss or gain. This process reached a new zenith with the quest for longitude. In the 17th century, the telescope, once turned toward the stars for philosophy, was aimed at the moons of Jupiter. By timing their eclipses, a mariner could find his east-west position on the open ocean with unprecedented accuracy. This was a profound conceptual leap, tying the very coordinates of Earth directly to the clockwork of the solar system. Geography was no longer just relative, it was absolute, locked into a cosmic grid. This consistency across time and space was the final, crucial ingredient. It meant that a coastline drawn in 1650 could be meaningfully compared to one drawn in 1720, because both were anchored to the same celestial mathematics. For the first time, humanity had the tools not just to map the world, but to audit its changes with scientific rigor. This invites a direct and powerful reflection. Our modern array of satellites, ocean buoys, and atmospheric sensors are the direct descendants of that brass astrolabe. They are our cross-staffs and telescopes, but operating on a planetary scale. Where a 17th century sailor might take a single depth sounding, a satellite altimeter now measures the height of every ocean wave and the slow, relentless creep of sea level rise across the entire globe. Our instruments have given us the consistent global dataset that allows us to see not just that the climate is changing, but the precise rate and pattern of that change. The workshop tools created the possibility of noticing a shifting riverbank. Our orbital sensors have created the undeniable, pixel-by-pixel portrait of a shifting planet. Yet this vast, instrumental clarity brings with it a poignant human question. For behind every precise line on those old maps, and behind every date a point on our modern screens, lies a story of ambition, hardship, and hope. A faint line of Latin script, almost lost in the margin, reads Hoc anno magna tempestas this year, a great storm. This is the cartographer's own voice, breaking through the formal geometry of the chart. Beyond the symbolic dragons and precise room lines, the most poignant records of a changing world are often these handwritten notes, the personal annotations of the mapmaker as direct witness. In an age before news services, the individual drawing the coastline became the first recorder of local catastrophe. A tiny village icon might be crossed out with a note, a blotter per inundationum, taken by flood. Next to a harbour, a quick sketch could show ships tossed onto a newly formed sandbar with a date scribbled beside it. On a Portolan chart used by Dutch sailors, you might find a warning in the North Sea, hic multa glacies here, much ice, an observation that would have been vital for survival, and now serves as a data point for historians tracking the Little Ice Age's advance. These are not symbols of faith or instruments of measurement. They are diary entries, the raw human reaction to a planet that refused to stay still. The story of the Zodiac in the Netherlands is written in the anxious updates of these charts. What began as a small inland lake, the Almere, was slowly transformed by a series of catastrophic North Sea storms in the late medieval period. Dutch cartographers, whose lives depended on accurate coastal knowledge, meticulously documented this invasion. On successive charts, you can see the tentative, then certain, etching of a new, vast bay clawing into the heart of the country. Notes would mark villages submerged, fertile land lost to salt water, and new, dangerous currents where farmland once stood. Each updated chart was a bulletin of loss, but also a tool for adaptation, guiding a society learning to live with and eventually reclaim the sea. This personal layer of observation adds a profound dimension to the map. It transforms it from a static representation into a living transcript of dialogue between a community and its environment. This leads us to a quiet question about our own digital age. Our mapping systems are filled with metadata, automated updates, and user-generated tags. A road closure, a traffic jam, a restaurant review. These are our era's marginalia. But where is the human voice documenting the larger, slower changes? Future historians may sift through satellite data layers showing urban heat islands or coastal erosion. But will they find the personal story, the note from a farmer about a changing planting season, or a family's observation of a creek that no longer freezes? Our annotations are often about convenience, not testimony. The medieval cartographer, in scratching a note about a storm, was bearing witness. Our challenge is to ensure that amidst the flood of impersonal data, we preserve spaces for that same human-scale observation, for the first-hand account that gives meaning to the measurement. These personal stories, however, were never told in isolation. They were woven into the larger cultural narratives that the maps themselves were designed to tell and to reinforce. The Garden of Eden was never meant to be found. At the very top of the world, often separated by a ring of fire or an impassable mountain range, medieval maps depicted it as a walled garden of impossible perfection. Inside its circular walls, 4 rivers flowed from a single spring, fruit hung heavy on every branch, and the air was forever temperate. This was not just a religious symbol, it was the era's most profound statement about environmental loss. Eden represented a state of the planet before hardship, a time of perpetual abundance and effortless harmony between humanity and nature. Exile from it was not merely a spiritual fall, it was the beginning of agricultural struggle, of harsh winters and scorching summers, of a world where survival required constant toil against a less forgiving climate. The mapmakers placed this perfect garden in the distant, unreachable east, a powerful visual metaphor. True environmental harmony existed, but it was geographically and temporally out of reach, a lost golden age. This depiction speaks to a deep cultural nostalgia, a collective memory or longing for a more stable, fertile world. Over centuries, the way Eden was drawn began to shift subtly. In earlier maps, it is a lush, vibrant center of life. In some later renditions, as exploration and a more mechanistic view of nature took hold, the walls might appear more fortified, the garden itself more orderly, less a wild paradise and more a cultivated estate to be managed. This visual evolution hints at a changing relationship with the ideal, from a paradise utterly lost to a system that could perhaps be controlled or recreated through human effort. This ancient symbol of a perfect, bygone climate invites a challenging modern parallel. In our scientific discourse, we often speak of pre-industrial climate baselines. We measure our current warming against the atmospheric conditions of the mid-18th century, a time before widespread fossil fuel use. This baseline serves a crucial scientific purpose, but culturally, does it also function as a kind of Eden? It represents a state of planetary balance we perceive as lost, a stable norm from which we have exiled ourselves through industrial activity. Our longing is not for a mythical garden, but for a measurable, historical condition of climatic stability. The medieval cartographer used Eden to illustrate humanity's fallen state in a world of seasons and strife. Our climate models use the pre-industrial baseline to illustrate our deviation from a planetary norm. Both are attempts to map a profound sense of dislocation from an ideal environment. This nostalgic framework, however, was never purely philosophical. It directly influenced how people of the age viewed the practical world around them and the resources they struggled to manage. A thick, dark line snakes across the parchment, connecting a castle to a port. On maps like the detailed Go map of Britain, rivers are not thin, decorative squiggles. They are bold, central highways drawn with a confident stroke that rivals the roads themselves. This visual prominence was a direct reflection of economic reality. In an age of terrible roads, a river was a natural conveyor belt, moving grain, timber, and stone with an efficiency that horse-drawn carts could never match. When a cartographer drew a river with particular care, labeling its crossing points and noting the towns along its banks, they were creating a commercial directory. The map declared this waterway is a working artery of the realm. Its consistent depth and flow were not just geographical facts, they were pillars of regional wealth. This practical focus makes these maps accidental archives of hydrology. A river drawn as a single, unbroken thick line from its source to the sea signaled a watercourse that was reliably navigable for most of the year. Compare that to a river that appears bold in one section but then frays into multiple, faint channels in another. That shift might indicate a marshy delta forming, or the beginning of a silting process that would, over decades, strangle a port and starve a town. Dutch polder maps from the 16th and 17th centuries take this documentation to an engineering level. They chart the precise bends of rivers like the Rhine and the Maas, not for poetry but for taxation and flood defense. By comparing these meticulous surveys over time, experts can see the landscape literally being rewritten. A dramatic meander loop shown on a map from 1580 might be absent on a map from 1620, replaced by a straight, canalized channel. That change tells a story of a community wrestling with nature, cutting off a slow, flooding curve to speed up drainage and claim more farmland. Each alteration, each attempted correction, is a response to an environmental pressure, a period of increased flooding, or the pressing need for more agricultural space. Hydrologists now use these sequences of maps as a kind of time lapse, allowing them to reconstruct past flood frequencies and understand how land use decisions, like deforestation upstream, manifested as erosion and new channels downstream centuries later. This practical cartography forces a question about our own era. We have straightened, dammed, and diverted most of the world's major rivers on a scale the medieval engineer could never conceive. Our interventions are recorded not on parchment, but in concrete and satellite imagery. How will a future cartographer document the story of the Colorado River, which now rarely reaches its ancient delta, or the Nile, whose seasonal flood is now a memory stored in a reservoir? Our maps show controlled, managed lines, but they have severed a vital historical record, the natural rhythm of the flow itself. The medieval mapmaker saw a river as a living highway to be used. We often see it as a system to be optimized. This shift from documenting a natural resource to diagramming its management marks a profound transition, one that extends beyond water to the very way we organize and preserve what we know. The ink fades, the parchment crumbles, and an entire world you can vanish in a single fire. For every map that survives, countless others have been lost to flame, flood, or deliberate erasure, taking with them irreplaceable chapters in the story of our planet. These lost collections represent a profound tragedy of knowledge, a silent library of environmental data that we can never consult. Consider the Maya codices, those intricate bark paper books that wove together celestial cycles, weather patterns, and agricultural calendars. When Spanish authorities ordered their destruction in the 16th century, they were not just burning religious texts, they were incinerating centuries of meticulous observation about Mesoamerican climate, turning a living database of tropical ecology into ash and smoke. Similarly, the legendary loss of the Library of Alexandria echoes through cartographic history. While its famous scrolls on philosophy and science are mourned, we must also grieve for the lost star charts and geographic treatises that held Greek, Egyptian, and Persian understandings of the Mediterranean world, its coastlines, and its seasonal winds. Each vanished map or codex is a missing piece in the global puzzle of past climate, a data point that could help us understand a drought, a flood, or a period of unusual warmth with greater clarity. This historical fragility forced cultures to become ingenious preservers. In medieval Europe, the quiet, candlelit scriptoria of monasteries served as the hard drives of their age. Monks dedicated their lives to the painstaking labor of copying, not just scriptures, but maps and scientific texts. With each careful transcription on fresh vellum, they saved a geographic vision from the decay of the original. Later, royal libraries and private collectors took up this mantle, assembling atlases and guarding rare Portolan charts as state secrets and treasures. Yet this system of preservation was heartbreakingly vulnerable. A single political upheaval, a sack of a city, or an accidental kitchen fire in a palace could erase in an afternoon what had taken generations to compile. The story of Mercator's Great World Map of 1569 is a stark reminder of this tenuous thread. After his death, his priceless copper printing plates were nearly sold for scrap metal, their unique projection and geographic synthesis almost lost to mere reuse. It was only through the last-minute intervention of a cartographer who recognized their worth that they were saved, allowing Mercator's revolutionary grid to guide navigation for centuries. Our historical baseline, the very record we use to measure change, hangs by such slender chances. This vulnerability of the past forces a critical and urgent reflection for our digital present. We have assembled vast global climate datasets, terabytes of satellite imagery, and complex models that live on servers and in the cloud. We feel this knowledge is permanent, instantly accessible. But is it any less fragile? Our data faces its own modern dragons, format obsolescence, where files become unreadable as software evolves, and the silent decay of digital storage media. It faces the threat of cyber attacks that could corrupt or delete foundational records, or simply the shifting priorities of institutions that may choose not to maintain costly digital archives. A server farm is no more immune to a catastrophe than a library of parchment. The medieval monk understood the physicality of knowledge, the need to actively and continually copy it to keep it alive. Our challenge is to cultivate that same ethic of active, vigilant preservation for the intangible data that now defines our understanding of Earth. We must not just collect the information, but ensure it remains readable and meaningful for those who come after, because preserving the past is the only compass we have for navigating the future. A windrose is more than a compass, it is a calendar written in lines. These intricate diagrams blossoming at the center of Portolan charts did not merely point north. Their radiating arms encoded the seasonal character of the winds, telling a sailor that a breeze from this quarter in April would likely be gentle, but from that quarter in October it could bring a gale. This was a profound conceptual leap. The map was no longer just a snapshot of what existed. It began to encapsulate patterns of behavior, offering a guide to what should be expected based on the time of year. It moved from description toward prediction. Similarly, early tidal charts, though rare, attempted to capture the moon's rhythmic pull on the seas, charting not a single state but a cycle of change. This shift is seen most clearly in a unique genre, the isolarii, or books of islands. these were essentially encyclopedic guides for maritime explorers and potential colonists. A map of Cyprus in an isolario would not only show its shape, but would note its forests of tall pine suitable for ship masts, its vineyards producing sweet wine, and the prevailing winds that made its harbors accessible or dangerous in certain seasons. This information transformed the map from a geographic document into a planning tool. It allowed a Venetian merchant or a Genoese captain to look at a drawing of a distant shore and make informed guesses, to model in their mind what resources they might find and what challenges they would face. They were layering environmental data atop geography to reduce the uncertainty of the future. While these were not predictive models in our computational sense, they embedded a crucial principle that understanding patterns in nature allowed for more informed action tomorrow. This forward-looking instinct, this urge to use the mapped past to navigate the unknown future, is the direct ancestor of our most urgent modern cartography. When we look at a digital heat map projecting which coastal neighborhoods will be underwater in 50 years, we are seeing the evolved descendant of the windrose and the isolario. Our map is built on petabytes of satellite data and complex climate physics, but its core function is identical: to take observed patterns from centuries of tidal gauges and decades of temperature records and project them forward to inform decisions, to plan cities, and to manage risk. The medieval cartographer used observed wind patterns to predict a safer sailing season. We use observed carbon concentrations and ice melt rates to predict planetary futures. The tools and the scale are galaxies apart, but the human impulse remains to draw a map not just of the world as it is, but of the world as it might yet be. The mapmaker's pen draws not a coastline, but a vein, tracing a river up the arm of a giant whose body is the world itself. In a quiet corner of the cartographic tradition, far from the practical Portolan or the symbolic Mappa Mundi, lies a profound and organic vision, the Earth itself imagined as a living human body. This was not a navigational tool, but a philosophical one, found in alchemical manuscripts and metaphysical texts. Here, great mountain ranges formed the planetary skeleton, dense forests were its flesh, and rivers pulsed as its vital circulatory system. The oceans might be the protective fluid surrounding this cosmic form. This anthropomorphic map was the ultimate statement of interconnection, a belief that the planet was not a collection of separate parts, but a single, breathing organism. In this view, the Earth could experience states of health or illness, balance or fever. A blight upon a forest was not an isolated event, it was a rash upon the skin. The silting of a major river was a clogged artery, threatening the vitality of lands far downstream. A period of unusual volcanic activity might be seen as the planet expelling a kind of internal heat, a fever breaking. This framework, while symbolic, created a powerful intuitive logic for environmental cause and effect long before the science of ecology gave us the language of systems and feedback loops. It suggested that a disturbance in one organ could send a shock through the entire body, a concept that resonates deeply with our modern understanding of how melting polar ice influences ocean currents worldwide, or how deforestation in one continent can alter rainfall patterns in another. This ancient, organic model challenges the often mechanistic way we sometimes discuss Earth systems today, as if they were separate machines to be managed, a climate engine here, a carbon cycle there. The body metaphor forced a holistic perspective where every element was part of a delicate, living whole. This leads us to a compelling modern reflection. Do contemporary scientific concepts like James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, which proposes the biosphere and atmosphere interact to maintain conditions for life, or the crucial framework of planetary boundaries, which defines safe operating limits for key Earth systems, represent a sophisticated return to this ancient, organic intuition. We have replaced veins and bones with geochemical cycles and atmospheric thresholds, but the core insight is strikingly similar. The planet functions as an integrated, self-regulating entity, and its health is a precondition for our own. The medieval thinker saw a sick river and wondered about the planet's humors. The modern scientist sees a disrupted nitrogen cycle and calculates its impact on global food webs. Both are attempting to diagnose the state of a single, complex patient, our shared home. This holistic view, seeing the world as one interconnected system, prepares us for the final, most direct act of cartographic time travel, placing the oldest maps side by side with the newest data to witness the story they tell in unison. A digital ghost appears over a modern city. This is the power of georeferencing, the precise alignment of a scanned medieval parchment with the satellite imagery of today. By painstakingly matching a handful of known, stable points, a mountain peak that has not moved, the bend of a river that remains recognizable, specialists in historical geographic information systems can stretch and adjust the old map until it sits like a transparent layer upon our contemporary world. The process is not perfect, as the old cartographer's perspective was often distorted, but the result is transformative. Suddenly, the symbolic drawing becomes a measurable baseline, a qualitative starting point from which we can calculate change with startling clarity. The coastline on a 13th century Portolan chart, once locked in ink, becomes a line we can compare pixel by pixel against the shoreline photographed from space. The difference between those two lines, measured in meters or even kilometers, tells a story of erosion or accretion written over hundreds of years by waves, currents, and rising seas. Similarly, the clusters of tiny tree symbols on a map like the Go map can be compared with modern land cover data. Where those symbolic forests once stood, we can now calculate the percentage of land that is still wooded versus what has been converted to farmland or urban sprawl, creating a rough but powerful timeline of deforestation that predates any official forestry service. Experts in this field, like those at the University of Portsmouth's project on the Go map, must apply careful corrections for the original map's scale errors and symbolic shorthand, but the overarching narrative that emerges is robust. Take the Cantino planisphere from the early 1500s, which depicts the West African coast with a remarkable, sailable accuracy. When georeferenced, its rendering of estuaries and lagoons, particularly around regions like modern-day Ghana and Ivory Coast, reveals how dramatically sediment from rivers and human activity has reshaped these shores, closing off some ancient inlets and creating new land in others. Closer to home, Tudor maps of London, when overlaid on thermal satellite images, provide a haunting visual correlation. The dense medieval street pattern of the old city, meticulously drawn on parchment, aligns almost perfectly with the modern city's most intense urban heat islands, areas where concrete and asphalt absorb and radiate heat, creating microclimates several degrees warmer than the surrounding parks and rivers. This is not a coincidence, it is a legacy written in stone and asphalt, showing how urban form, locked in centuries ago, continues to dictate environmental conditions today. This comparative technique does more than prove change happened. It allows us to measure its pace, establishing a baseline from the year 1300 versus one from 1800 creates 2 points on a graph, letting us see if coastal erosion accelerated with industrialization or if forest clearance slowed due to conservation efforts. It transforms anecdotal observation into a dataset for deep time. This practical application asks us the core question: what do we learn about the rate of change when we extend our timeline back by centuries instead of decades? The answer is often one of unsettling acceleration. The slow creep of a coastline that a medieval monk might not have noticed in his lifetime becomes, over 8 centuries, a dramatic retreat. The gradual clearing of a woodland becomes a sudden collapse when viewed across the full span. These layered maps show us that the planet's changes are not new, but their velocity often is. This digital overlay is the final, crucial step in translation, turning a historical artifact into a scientific instrument and allowing the mapmaker's careful ink to speak directly to our pressing planetary present. The ultimate revelation from these maps is not about geography, but about time itself. Every faded line and anxious annotation whispers the same truth: our ancestors never knew a stable world. They lived on a planet they perceived as dynamic, often unpredictably so, and their maps are the lasting record of that profound understanding. From the wind faces personifying seasonal fury to the frantic updates on a Portolan chart, these artifacts are not static snapshots, they are chronicles of continuous adaptation. They capture humanity in a perpetual conversation with a home that was always speaking back, through eroding shores, shifting rivers, and changing skies. The medieval monk who drew a dragon at the edge of the sea was not depicting a fantasy, he was encoding a reality that beyond the known harbors lay forces capable of reshaping everything. This long perspective, stretching back 8 centuries or more, does something vital. It shatters the illusion of a static, unchanging past. There was no golden age of environmental stability from which we have fallen. There was only constant negotiation, a series of responses to floods, freezes, and droughts that were written directly into the cultural memory of maps. This normalization of change is the first gift of these ancient documents. They free us from a paralyzing nostalgia for a planet that never existed. Yet within this normalization lies their second, more urgent gift, a baseline for measuring velocity. When we place the slow coastal retreat documented over 500 years on a Portolan sequence next to the satellite data showing that same rate accelerating tenfold in the last 50, the story shifts. The maps reveal that change is the constant, but the speed and the driver are what have transformed. Our ancestors mapped their responses to a changing climate. We are now mapping our influence upon it. The line between adapting to nature and directing its course has blurred, and the oldest maps in our possession give us the deep time context to see that transition with clear eyes. They prepare us to ask not whether the planet changes, but what role we choose to play in the next chapter of its story, a chapter we are now writing with every decision we make. The final whisper from these maps is not a sound but a responsibility. As we close the ancient atlases, their faded lines and symbolic monsters leave us with a profound truth. To understand our planet's future, we must first listen to its past. We have journeyed from the encircling ocean of the TO map to the melting poles charted by desperate explorers, witnessing how every deliberate choice of ink, from a wind face to a blank space, holds a clue to Earth's long story. These documents reveal that environmental change is not new. It is the constant backdrop of human history. What is new, and what these maps have helped us build, is our unprecedented capacity to measure and understand that change on a global scale. We can now see the whole picture, from the pollen in the vellum to the satellite over the ice sheet. With that panoramic vision comes a profound imperative: the responsibility to act with the wisdom of the long view. We are not the first generation to map a shifting world, but we are the first to hold the complete, urgent baseline in our hands. So let these fragile parchments be more than artifacts, let them be a compass. They remind us that our own moment will one day be a layer on a future map, a data point in a much longer story. What symbols will future cartographers use to define our era? Will they draw parched riverbeds where we once charted fertile deltas? Will they note the rapid retreat of lines we thought were permanent? The story is still being written, and the next chapter depends on the choices we make with the knowledge we have inherited. If this journey through the world's oldest diaries has resonated with you, please help us chart this channel's course by subscribing. We would love to hear which ancient map fascinates you most, so share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and for listening to the whispers of history.